This one is going to be a bit controversial, partly for the design, but mostly for what's powering it. This is the Pitzmann Overture, a vibrant, playful sports watch powered by an ETA F07.402, making it the only high-accuracy quartz watch I've seen from a microbrand. And it's also the main reason I agreed to do this review. Now, I never planned on it, but somehow over the years I've become a collector of high-accuracy quartz watches, and this is one of my newer ones. And eventually you'll see a review of this Grand Seiko. But when Pitzmann reached out to me about a month or a month and a half ago, I was actually working on the review of my Citizen Chronomaster. So when they reached out, said they had a high-accuracy quartz watch coming, my curiosity was piqued at what they could do with it. So for this one, Pitzmann has gone with a 39mm case and a 46mm lug-to-lug. Thanks to the quartz movement, it's also extremely thin, sitting right at 8.35mm, despite it still being a fairly capable watch with 120 meters of water resistance. And that also includes a closed case back, a flat sapphire crystal, as well as a screwed down crown. Now that 120 meters is a little bit of an odd number. I'm just used to seeing more round numbers from brands. More like seeing 100, not 120. But either way, it's got all the makings of a great gotta or go anywhere do anything watch. And in terms of price, this one has an MSRP of $550 US. Now, for the sake of transparency, Pitzmann provided this watch, and they aren't asking for it back, hence their promotional tag at the beginning. That said, let's get to it. And I think the first thing to talk about is just how unexpected this watch is, and especially for those familiar with the brand. I mean, the fact they made this at all is going to be confusing for some of you. Because their last two releases, both of which have been pretty well received, were more classic looking automatic higher priced watches. One of which was an automatic chronograph powered by a Seiko 8R48. Heck, I didn't even know those were available to microbrands until they came out with that one. But to put those two out and then follow this up with a more affordable watch and one with a pretty vibrant, playful, almost swatch-like dial, one that's powered by a high-accuracy quartz movement, was probably the last thing anyone was expecting. But here we are. In this movement, the F07.402 is what the ETA group calls their Perca-drive or Persa-drive movement. It's their high-accuracy quartz. ETA doesn't really seem to talk about these too much, but I have heard about them from time to time, as they are available in a couple Certinas and a few Tissot's. And in general, if you're not familiar with high-accuracy quartz, know that there aren't too many of these movements out there. It's kind of a very niche small market. But like most of the ones that are out there, this one is going to offer you an accuracy level of around plus or 10 seconds a year. Emphasis on a year, as that is pretty superior to a regular quartz watch, which is more like plus or minus 20 seconds a month. And then when you're talking automatics, you're talking per day. So in the world of high accuracy quartz, in terms of price, these are going to be comparable to the Bulova Precisionist. But in terms of accuracy, they'll actually be better than the Bulovas. And they're going to be more on par with the short-lived Longines VHP and the more expensive Grand Seiko 9F line. We'll talk a little bit more about the movement and kind of the value aspect of it in a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to get some of this out there now, as it is a pretty important part about what makes this watch interesting. The other part being this really vibrant festive dial. Now, with the Overture, there are going to be three different colorways. You have a darker blue, a green, and this lighter blue. But the overall design is still the same. And in some ways, you could say that this is Pitzmann's take on the Rolex Celebration that came out, where they took their Oyster Perpetual, a great everyday watch, and then kind of swatched it up or made it a little more festive. It's a design that isn't for everyone, just like this one, but for some people, it's just kind of a cool option to have out there. Now, while this is pretty festive, it is a bit of a different design than the Rolex. And Pitzmann says that this style design is more about observing the beauty of nature or the beauty of cityscapes through the lens of a rain-dappled window. And I can kind of see that here. But whatever the inspiration, whatever you want to call this thing, it winds up being vibrant, fun, and a bit different. It's a watch with a ton of presence despite its 39mm size. And wearing it around this time of year, as Christmas is coming up, I've actually had a few people see this on my wrist and think it was more of a Christmas-themed watch. That all the little dots here were kind of representing lights on a Christmas tree. So I think it's safe to say that this one is a bit of an attention grabber. It's also one that seems to be pretty well made. The indices look great here in these macro shots. They are applied with just a little bit of height, giving the entire watch some added depth despite its very narrow nature. The hands here are a little bit short, but otherwise look great, as well as being fairly easy to find despite all the added clutter here. For me, the only thing that didn't quite work with this dial design is the text at the bottom. It's not very easy to make out what it says. Which, to be fair here, I don't really like a whole lot of text on a dial anyways. So the fact that this sort of blends in isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I also think up here at the top, maybe just putting their logo instead of the name would be a better thing as well. Also, for those of you keeping score when it comes to quartz, note that the second hand here isn't perfectly lined up, but it is pretty close, and I think close enough. Remember, the camera angle isn't always perfectly lined up here, and from what I'm seeing, it may be off by maybe a degree when you really zoom in. And before we move on, let's talk about Lume for a second, as this is another aspect Pitzmann did a pretty good job on. Everything here is nice and bright with a healthy application of blue BGW9. The dial lasts a little bit longer than the hands, but for the most part, those hands are still able to keep up with a Seiko diver. And for an all-purpose sports watch, that's pretty good. An all-purpose sports watch is really what this case design is. And in some ways, it doesn't quite match the fun, playful nature of the dial, as the case here is that of just a Gata sports watch. It's a nice, thin, streamlined case with stubby lugs. A case that's mostly brushed with just a few polished sections to draw your eyes in. And I think maybe the one thing that kind of disconnects the case from the dial is the very flat brushed bezel surrounding it. To me, that big flat brushed area is something I'd expect on more of a straight tool watch than something more fun. But, that is kind of a minor thing. And I think for the most part, the finish and the quality of the case is really good. A keyword there, for the most part, because there is one exception to that. All along the back edge from lug to lug, it is a bit sharp. And that's also unfortunately something that continues to the back edge of the bracelet. And as a whole, it winds up being a little bit problematic. Now the front of the bracelet, that is pretty nice and very cool looking. It's kind of an oyster style with a geometric edge, where the polished sections catch the light in a really cool way. That bracelet also has quick release end links and a really nice milled clasp with a pretty unusual quick adjust system, one where the button's on the front. And that quick release system is also there in addition to some half links, so you could really adjust this thing perfectly for your wrist. Now the quick adjust button on the front is a little bit odd looking, but it does come in handy for adjusting the watch without taking it off. However, let's get back to the whole sharp back edge, because that is a little bit of a problem. Because you not only feel it when handling the watch, but you occasionally feel it while wearing it. Now, I wear my watches a little bit loose, and when it is kind of moving around, I sometimes feel that edge on my wrist. Now, it's not horrible, and it doesn't completely ruin the experience. I'm not dying to just rip this thing off. But I think it is definitely noticeable, and it hurts what is otherwise a great experience on the wrist. And, a few $100s less, and I think this would be acceptable. I've seen plenty of watches like that. But as you get over that $500 mark, you can't really ignore these finer details. It kind of adds up to bigger problems. So just be aware of that if you're actually interested in this one. Now, before we wrap this whole thing up, let's talk again about the movement and just the value of high accuracy quartz. And at this point, I'm assuming everyone who just hates quartz beyond any rational reasoning has already left. At this point, they've already left a snarky comment and clicked on another video. Which is good, because that means we don't have to have the whole quartz isn't just for cheap watches talk, or that a watch is more than just a movement conversation. Saves time. And if you really want to hear some of that, I had a little bit of a rant in my recent Chronomaster review, so just go watch that. But more to the point, here we still have to talk about whether or not you really need high accuracy quartz. And the answer is no, because regular quartz watches are good enough for most people. And remember, this is coming from someone who owns a number of them. But at the same time, high accuracy quartz is still nice to have, and it's one of those things that it's better to have it than not. It's just you don't necessarily need it. and it's never really a reason to buy a watch just because of that. You still have to love the rest of the watch it's wrapped up in. And honestly, how useful high accuracy is really depends on where you live. For instance, here in the US, we still have daylight savings, which means when you have a watch like this or you have a watch like the Precisionist, you're still going to have to stop it to reset it every 6 months or so. And that honestly kind of defeats the whole point of high accuracy. Now, there are some watches where that's not an issue, kind of like the Chronomaster and the Grand Seiko 9F. As with those, you can jump the hour movement in 1 hour increments without stopping to reset everything. But here with this watch, you don't. Now, if you do happen to live somewhere where you don't have daylight savings, then that's where something like this comes in handy. Because with that, you can set it, and then in about 4.5 years when the battery dies, you'll still be within a minute of accuracy. Which is exactly what you want in a great grab-and-go quartz watch, something that's ready whenever you are. And while I really don't want to drag this out too long, there's still one other thing to talk about. That's multi-banded Bluetooth. That there are alternate technologies out there that can constantly sync your watch, ensuring accuracy in the long run. And a lot of times those can be had for a lot cheaper than a high accuracy quartz watch, especially when you're looking at like the Citizen Chronomaster and Grand Seiko. So with one of those, as long as you're within range of one of those towers, it's great and a better option, honestly. But the thing to remember is that it is called multiband 6 for a reason. There are only 6 towers in the entire world, so not everyone is covered and can use that. So if you don't have access to that, that again is another area where high accuracy really comes in handy. Let's get back to the Pitzmann. And bottom line here is that it's a playful, fun, vibrant, unique, and versatile watch. Just like with the Rolex Celebration, some people are going to fall in love with this dial and want it just for that presence. But to be honest, it's also going to be a watch for a very select audience. This one's going to be pretty niche, as you really got to find a watch collector out there who not only likes quartz, but is also wanting something unusual and fun on their wrist. And that's not everyone. Most people like to have something a little bit more low-key. Or at the same time, you gotta find a watch geek who's really looking for a good present for someone who isn't a watch geek, as this has all the makings of a great everyday watch without all the extra fun and fiddling that comes with a nice $500 automatic. And as you might expect, that's gonna be a pretty small audience. Although it is one that I'm probably in, because despite the bracelet issues here, I do like it for something a bit more fun. And I'm curious just to see how Pitzmann's going to do with this in the long run. But as usual, let me know your thoughts down below on this or just nicer quartz watches in general. And as always, you guys know what to do down below. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.